Masks in metal and heavy music, it seems like an amazing idea, right? Not only does it present a visually unique and appealing image for the bands, but puts the full focus onto the actual music as opposed to the musician's dumb face attempting to wink at any girls in the audience. Despite the mask being utilised most prominently by acts such as Slipknot or GWAR, the visual style is seeing a resurgence in the modern day, with some of the most talked about metal acts choosing to disguise themselves behind mysterious pieces of plastic and rubber, often hiding their real identities altogether. Heavily stylised masks alongside over-the-top outfits and monumental stage performances seem like a good idea on the surface, and have worked effectively in the past countless times. The mask pulls the art away from the personality of the individual making the music and places full focus onto the actual art. It can also at times contribute to the art effectively, presenting a visual statement that coincides with the message of the music. Unfortunately, it seems like in the modern day, masks and costumes are being utilised as a marketing strategy as opposed to an appropriate visual addition to the music, with bands sounding and presenting themselves in a way that is antithetical to the masks that they wear. The mask, which was once utilised effectively by legends such as The Resident and TISM to hide the musicians from judgment and in some cases legal trouble and present an unrelenting image in connection to their art, is now just being used to make bands that would otherwise be entirely uninteresting, marketable and appealing to a wide audience. I think it's clear the two bands I'm alluding to here: Sleep Token, the overly theatrical pop band who have become solely reliant on their costumes for success, or even worse, and I mean much worse, the band President that decides to call themselves President, wear a president outfit, theme their entire brand around politics, and then proceed to make zero statement on the state of politics within their music, instead just vapid, edgy bollocks. Even once beloved masked bands like Slipknot are not free from this epidemic, slowly morphing into a corporate merchandising and events company as opposed to the once beloved metal act. There's a lot to unpack here, with, spoiler alert, masks essentially just being used for marketability and of course money in the modern day, with the most egregious example being President, who might just have a sprinkling of extremely spicy alleged industry plant evidence that I will present later in this video. Thing is, it wasn't always like this. Masks have been utilised in music for decades, with the vast majority of the bands wielding their power for all the right reasons. So before I get incredibly nihilistic and potentially roast the shit out of some of your favourite bands, let's briefly look into the history of masks within heavy music, so we can understand who's done it right, who's done it wrong, and why this gimmick keeps popping up within the genre of metal. But let's be honest here, I just about have enough knowledge to be able to ignorantly yap about the overarching topic of music. What the do I know about masks? If only there was an individual on the internet who has dedicated his life to the art form of masks, has the largest Slipknot memorabilia collection in the world, and has worked alongside prominent masked figures within music such as Sid Wilson and Jay Weiberg. Oh wait, yeah, that dude quite literally does exist, and here he is.
My name is AJ Good from the House of Masks, and my channel kind of centers around anything and everything mask related. So we cover everything from theatrical music to classic horror villain slashers to video games to vintage Halloween. If it's mask related, there's a good chance that it's on my channel.
Describe your passion for the kind of art form of masks, and when did this passion begin for you?
Somewhere between the age of 4 and 6, between watching like horror movies with my grandpa, something like a Michael Myers character really just kind of took over my thoughts. As I got a little older, I discovered stuff like Slipknot. I just realized that those masks are obtainable in a sense, so my collecting kind of came from.
What do you think is like so appealing about the art form of masks for you? Why do you think it kind of developed into a passion?
I wish I could tell you. I hear people talk about masks, especially with bands and stuff, where they say like they can put them on and kind of come up with a new character, a new persona, but it's never been like that for me. I just really admire what they are. It's kind of a mix of a bunch of different mediums, right? So you've got like your 3D elements with a sculpt, and then you've got your 2D elements with the painting and the finishes that go on them, and I guess the possibilities are endless with them too. I mean, we haven't ran out of ideas for masks yet, so.
In your opinion, why do you think masks are effective, specifically in music, and have become such a mainstay?
I think that they're important because of what I just mentioned, even though I don't feel that when I get dressed up or whatever. It obviously works for a lot of people. I mean, how many interviews have you seen with masked artists where they ask why the masks, and these guys are like, well, it allows me to tap into a different side of myself or whatever, be the truer me with something like heavy music, where it is as hardcore as it gets. It's in your face, it's an experience. I feel like that sort of animal mentality is important, and if it helps bring that out, then That's great.
Before we do a deep dive into the history of masks within the genre, I would like to quickly lay a few ground rules on what I personally consider to be a mask. In terms of definition, a mask just means covering of the face, meaning technically face paint counts, but that would mean I'd need to talk about black metal again. So for the sake of this video, I will consider a mask to be some sort of fabric or material worn over the head or the face. Let's first look at an artist who wouldn't be considered metal in the traditional sense, although in terms of experimentation, heaviness, creativity, and obtuse boundary pushing, I'd argue no other artist in the history of music comes close to The Residents, a band that utilized costumes and masks for the promotion of art and unique identity in a time period where they would continuously be scrutinized for doing so, as opposed to, you know, gaining a horde of thirst trap and e-girl fans on TikTok.
Dude, The Residents are rad. Yeah, I love The Residents. I didn't dive too hard into them, but I know that they're OGs. And how do you beat a look like that? A suit and an eyeball? That's
yeah,
like,
it's crazy.
I want to do it right now.
Although the group of artists that met in high school would begin their career recording crude demos and practicing at home without the need for any disguise, this would quickly change after the introduction of their most mysterious member, Ensenada, which happened to coincide with the start of their live performances, largely taking place at open mics. The band would begin their costume escapades by donning cheerleader outfits, although as their art began to develop into filmmaking and avant-garde performances, they would introduce outfits such as bandages, cow masks, and repurposed newspapers that resembled KKK hoods. Despite the clear likeness, the band confirmed that the similarity was simply a coincidence. Although the Residents had utilized costumes and masks to hide their identity throughout their early career, their most well-known costume would be birthed in 1979 and ultimately culminated in the most iconic picture of the band. A picture so iconic it perhaps spans further than the band itself. The photograph consists of each member being situated in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, donning a suit, top hat, and large spherical eyeball mask. This look would become the most iconic for the Residents, with eyeballs becoming a staple of their visual presentation. This eyeball obsession would actually be inspired by Hardy Fox, the main composer of The Residents, who throughout childhood would often dance and sing in incredibly strange ways to reflect his brimming creativity. Despite his passion for strange movements, he only danced when no one was looking, quickly halting the movement if somebody were to glance over. This seems to explain the need for anonymity and masks within the Residents project, although I think there is far more at play here, which actually more so relates to the state of modern masks than you would think. This is because the Residents present perhaps the perfect reasoning for the usage of masks and anonymity within visual presentation, art, and music. Hardy Fox grew up in rural Texas and remained emotionally distant from his father, who would often disapprove of his many creative endeavors despite his immense talent. The attitude of his father reflected a lot of the United States at the time, and although the hippie movement had allowed for heightened expression and creativity within art, the world just still wasn't ready for the Residents, and I'd argue we still aren't today based on how creepy some of this shit is. Their music is so strange, experimental, and at times disturbing. The rejection and ridicule from the general public were rife within their career, and that, my parasocial friend, is what makes the masks so important. The band needed anonymity to be able to freely create and experiment without fear of personal consequences, allowing for the free flow of extremely creative, groundbreaking, and genre-bending art. I also suppose the anonymity makes perfect sense when you learn that one of their early album covers depicted a but we will swiftly move on from that and briefly compare the Residents to the two prominent modern examples of masked bands. Both Sleep Token and President are creating music within an era that allows for endless expression, creativity, and edge, a time where shock value altogether has pretty much disappeared, a time where the Norwegian black metal murders seem tame in comparison to half the shit presented in video essays on your YouTube homepage. This makes the usage of masks less so risky and more so beneficial in terms of creating a visual image that appeals to a large number of people who would ignore the music if it wasn't for the visual stimuli. The Residents wore the masks to allow for freedom within their art. These modern bands wear the masks to attempt to push their art to more people through an increasingly visual modern art landscape. Although I do think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here. Perhaps I cannot help myself but shit on these two bands or whatever chance I get, although mainly this one to be fair. I will present some Sleep Token defense later in this video, so be patient, young one.
Do you think the mystique behind the masks have been lost a little bit? Or is it just kind of evolving into something else? Like it's kind of no longer a mystery outside of like Sleep Token, who these people are usually?
It just depends. I think some of them just aren't careful. I mean, Swollen Teeth is a really good example of how you can still do the mask thing right. Like they've got the look down. Like who would have thought that like adding gaffer's tape to a bunch of store-bought masks would be such a cool look, but it takes you back to like the early Slipknot days where they just had store-bought masks that they were sticking zippers on and like bondage style leather strapping or whatever. So Swollen Teeth have the look and they have the mystique because they are super serious about people not knowing who they are. And I feel like if that's what you want to do, you can maintain that anonymity, because I've toured with them, I've stayed the night with them, I've shared green rooms with them for the last 3 years, and I still have no idea who they are or what they look like. So.
Wow. Although the Residents would create shocking costumes within an era that actively pushed against their art and music, I feel there is no other band in history that donned costumes and put on stage performances that are as shocking as GWAR, with some of their on-stage stunts being ghastly to this very day, mainly due to how impressive some of this shit is. In the 40 years since GWAR landed on this very planet and trolled the fuck out of every talk show host they had the opportunity to meet, they have effectively utilized the concept of a metal band to present a form of theatre, with the visual art taking center stage within the project. In terms of actual masks, the band have donned various different costumes on stage, with each of these costumes being overly complicated and requiring a metric ton of latex. They would eventually become mainly known for their alien costume, with the band rarely breaking character. The band has put so much focus onto their visual image on stage throughout the years that various members throughout the band's lifespan don't even play any form of musical instrument, and instead focus on the physical art involved in creating a GWAR project, which is arguably more impressive than the music, and in my opinion rivals modern day Hollywood in terms of creativity. GWAR are perhaps the most over-the-top and theatrical example of a masked band, putting modern day Slipknot to shame. But how did it start? Why exactly do GWAR wear the masks, and how does it compare to the modern day masked band?
GWAR and their usage of the masks, I'll give them a 9 out of 10. They created their own galaxy, their own universe of a whole lore based around getting dressed up in costumes and really like doing the whole thing. So I love GWAR. I think that they were pretty perfect for a very long time, and I think that there's a lot of GWAR theatrics for people to uncover.
GWAR would originally form out of the hardcore punk band Death Piggy, fronted by vocalist Dave Brockie. Brockie would fall in love with the theatrics surrounding the genre, although wanted to push it further than just shaved heads and crudely drawn X's, so began staging theatrical performances during his live shows. At the time, the band would rehearse at an abandoned bottling plant that had been overrun by hippies who rented out the space to artists. It'll be here that Brockie met Hunter Jackson and Chuck Varga, who were utilizing the space to create props for their upcoming film Scumdogs of the Universe. They decided to put the costumes for this film to use specifically for a support act for Death Piggy, although the costumed band quickly mogged Death Piggy in terms of audience support. The reason for this is obvious when learning more details. The support act would rock up on stage, dressed like strange creatures from Antarctica, immediately let out a primal yell before executing prop animals on stage. It got to the point where the vast majority of audience members would leave before the headlining act due to how enthralling these Antarctic creatures had become. Eventually, Brockie scrapped Death Piggy altogether and focused all of his efforts onto his new project, naming it GWAR, based on the sound they would make when going on stage, something like this. Since this point, GWAR have utilized their image, anonymity, and the freedom of costume design to do some pretty f***ing wild shit on stage, decapitating fake politicians, disemboweling Paris Hilton, feeding Jerry Springer to the almighty world maggot, with all these stunts being possible due to extremely impressive and over-the-top practical effects. GWAR are a shock rock band at heart, but instead of shitting in their hands and molesting audience members like other prominent shock rockers in the past, they presented the concept of shock in a way that was incredibly artistic and made possible due to the masks. Their music and antics are clearly intended to cause some sort of disturbance to the mind of boomers, but unlike other shock rockers, they were able to send a message in terms of comedic political commentary. They utilized the anonymity and freedom of the costumes to not only express their artistic flair in terms of practical effects, but point fun at the state of the world, whether it be politics or culture. GWAR wears the masks because that is what makes GWAR GWAR. They are equally an art project as they are a band, and despite seeming far more goofy than the modern day master bands like Sleep Token, President and even Slipknot, they were able to give more effective commentary on the state of culture than these bands ever could. But hey, I suppose calling your band President and wearing a president mask despite making zero political commentary is very brave, unique, and deserves to be applauded. Applaud now. Put GWAR in the trash and let me know when they start playing auto-tuned pop gent at heavy metal festivals. When it comes to bands from the past that utilize masks in a way that I feel pushes forwards the art form and avoids any form of insincerity, The Residents and GWAR are the two best examples. Despite this, there are so many more instances of musicians utilizing masks for all the right reasons, so let's do a small little speedrun here. I can only predict the amount of hatred I would receive in the comment section of this video if I failed to mention the enigmatic Buckethead, the virtuosic guitarist who admits publicly that the chicken bucket mask combo is utilized to hide the scratch scars he received from being raised in a chicken coop, actually utilizes the mask to overcome social anxiety and stage fright, essentially creating a character for himself and his music. The mask would in reality be inspired by a nutritious KFC dinner alongside the film Halloween 4. I think it's obvious which bit inspired which bit. Buckethead has since become an enigmatic figure within music due to how rarely he is actually spotted without his signature bucket mask combo. It takes the focus away from the individual and towards the music, and of course there is nothing cool or marketable about a greasy KFC bucket slapped onto a dome piece, so we can wipe away any insincerity allegations right there.
I love Buckethead for a different reason than I love a lot of these other theatrical bands. I love Buckethead because he, like myself, made a kind of a career out of what he collects, and that all comes out on stage. So even if it's not just the white mask and a KFC bucket or whatever, he's always up there doing something else theatric. Like he'll do nunchucks while he rips a guitar solo, or he'll do like some basketball related stuff, or do the robot. Like I think that everything he does is pretty cool.
Devo are another band that utilized masks as a key feature of their art and music. Prominent members would state that their fascination with masks began when they realized they could utilize them as a portal to travel outside of themselves for the production of art. In order to fully understand the masks of Devo, you need to understand Devo itself, a band that is essentially an alternative world, separate from the musicians creating the art and focusing entirely on the key concept of de-evolution, the idea that humanity isn't evolving, quite literally the opposite, which does make sense considering the topic of this video. The masks allowed them to present a visual style that coincided with the satirical humor and experimental art punk style. It would actually be Devo that inspired another prominent example of a masked band, Mr. Bungle, who utilized the masks for very similar reasons, only this time it involved clowns and a lot of horns and music that kind of scares me sometimes, but also sometimes makes me bop my goddamn head in a schizophrenic manner. Another example is TISM, which in terms of utilizing masks for anonymity are similar to Devo or The Residents, except turn up to 11, mainly due to the fact that they have admitted one of the reasons for their usage of balaclavas alongside various other wildly eccentric costumes is due to their provocative lyricism and the legal consequences that may have come as a result of that. Despite the band admitting themselves that they are not shy in any way, they refused to perform or turn up to interviews without wearing the costumes, once again presenting a satirical outlook on the world without fear of judgment or any watering down that may come from the individual personality. Although each of the bands I've mentioned so far are wildly different in terms of presentation style and genre conventions, they are similar in terms of the sincerity of the reasoning behind their usage of masks and costumes. It mostly boils down to the presentation of their art form, with the state of culture at the time explaining why much of the usage seemed far more natural and less corporate than it does today. Whether it be The Residents, GWAR, Devo or TISM, they all existed in an era where their art form and music was likely to receive a large amount of pushback due to either the subject matter, shocking nature, or experimentation within the art. The masks allowed them to reject this, whether that be to protect themselves from judgment or shock even further, like in the case of specifically GWAR. This has obviously changed a lot in the decades since these bands first saw prominence. The internet has well and truly risen, and whether you see that as a positive or not, it is just a fact that Western culture has become massively massively desensitized to any form of shock. There is one example, however, of a band that has existed and released music to extreme popularity during the time frame in which desensitization has increased at the fastest rate in human history. Perhaps the most prominent masked band in history, a band that originally shocked audience members with their horrific masks and eventually just became a touring circus act akin to the Blue Man Group. The band is Slipknot, the perfect band to transition us from the past to the dystopian landscape that is modern day mainstream metal.
Well, my passion for Slipknot goes all the way back to 99, 2000, probably early 2000, when I was like 6. Very specifically remember going through a Rolling Stone magazine, seeing a photo of them during like the self-titled era, and just like knowing that something was different about that photo and about the masks that they were wearing and about the jumpsuits that they had on. Somewhere around that time, got to watch the Wait and Bleed music video. It was like the mind-blowing meme. I just knew like I had never heard anything that aggressive or seen visuals from a live show that looked like the live footage in that video. And I knew that Joey was a way different drummer than any drummer I'd heard up to that point. I mean, everything, man, from like the band logo to the name of the band, right down to like each individual mask and the mannerisms of the person wearing it, I thought was absolutely amazing.
When you think of the topic of masks within music, unless you're old enough to actively suck down on Werther's originals or young enough to chief down on Tamagotchi geek, Slipknot is likely the first band that comes to mind. Masks and costumes have been the key selling points behind their music from the very beginning, with the band going through various changes in visual presentation throughout the years, from the iconic red jumpsuits early on to whatever the this ugly abomination is in the present day. As their visual presentation has evolved, or in my opinion massively devolved, so has their supposed reasoning for wearing and utilizing the masks. But before we get to that, let's quickly analyze the origins of Slipknot and most importantly why they chose to wear masks in the first place. The original idea to wear masks on stage would come from the supposed creative driving force behind the band, Sean Crahan, also known as Clown. Apparently Clown would receive his original mask when he was 14 and was immediately drawn to the latex item. He had always wondered why it suddenly appeared in his life until he had a moment of clarity and realized the clown is what he wanted to portray to the world. He then tried to convince the other members to do the same. They would originally reject the idea, although quickly realized that it would look incredibly stupid to just have one fat clown bashing a bin with a baseball bat on stage. This is obviously an overly pretentious backstory relayed by an egotistical boomer decades after the formation of the band, so let's explore the potential real reason for the usage. Early on in their career, various members would explain how the masks allowed them to be free on stage, essentially release the beast and perform in any way they want. It also takes the music and songwriting away from the individual personality and face. It is also said that each mask represents the person wearing it. It visually presents the darkest and deepest fears, secrets or insecurities, which is then relayed within the music. You may be currently screaming at your screened device. These reasons are almost identical to the previous bands you covered positively. Why are Slipknot one of the problem bands? Well, it has a lot to do with what I see as the real reasons for the masks, which was theorized early on in their career and has essentially been confirmed through their actions in the decades since. If you're aware of the nu metal scene that birthed Slipknot, it's likely you're also aware of Mushroomhead, another masked band that resembles Slipknot heavily in terms of visual presentation. Despite Slipknot's dominance in terms of popularity and relevance, Mushroomhead would actually form 2 years before Slipknot and was approached by Slipknot's original label Roadrunner long before Sean Crahan put on the dumb clown mask. The band would decline due to a lack of financial incentive, which may explain why just 2 years later a band that heavily resembled Mushroomhead playing music within the same scene would suddenly appear onto Roadrunner Records to huge success. It's clear the visual presentation of Mushroomhead was one of the main reasons Roadrunner presented the deal, which brings us to the first corporate accusation presented towards Slipknot, the theory that from the very beginning Slipknot was Roadrunner's attempt to essentially create their own Mushroomhead and profit off of a niche and image that they obviously saw as very appealing. Whether these accusations are true or not, the idea that Slipknot are more of a commercial entity than an artistic project would morph from a theory to straight up facts as their career would progress. I know I am consistently a professional hater on this channel, but I absolutely fucking adore early Slipknot. The first 3 albums, alongside their visual style, music videos and antics on stage, appealed to me as a child and into the modern day. They were kinda goofy but in an extremely unique way and consistently put out interesting music. This adoration has slowly watered down for me. All I really have to do to explain this is just show Sid Wilson's mask throughout the years. Awesome, yeah, that is wicked. Wait, I don't understand. Slipknot's slow decline in creativity and trudge towards corporate entity can be easily explained by their consistent replacement of classic members, which is a problem that may be entirely the fault of the masks. When I personally think of Slipknot, I picture the iconic masks of Chris Fenn, Craig Jones, and of course the unique drumming style utilized by Joey Jordison. Unfortunately, these three iconic figures are no longer present within Slipknot music, merchandising, or visual persona, well, unless it's for the sole purpose of profiting off of a death, allegedly, but we'll get to that. Let's start with the original drummer and creative powerhouse Joey Jordison. Before Jordison's untimely passing, he was allegedly fired by email, with the reasoning supposedly being drug issues, although it was later revealed that Jordison's strange behavior was due to a neurological disorder. He would not receive mention from the band until his tragic passing, where a lot of his belongings were immediately and very conveniently placed into their touring Slipknot museum. Despite the reasoning for his first original firing being presented as drug issues, I have another theory to present in regards to Jordison's strange replacement, which is actually backed up by another recent band replacement. Out of any member within a band, it's clear that the drummer is going to deteriorate fastest due to age and health issues. Drumming is an intense instrument, and within heavier genres like metal or punk, it is essentially a sport. It's clear Slipknot, who present themselves as a touring stage act and fashion brand in the modern day, is only going to care about abilities and stage presence, which is likely one of the reasons that Slipknot's second drummer, Jay Weinberg, was also recently replaced by the phenom that is Eloy Casagrande. Do not get me wrong, it's clear that Eloy is one of, if not the best metal drummer on the planet right now, but that is the exact problem. After Jordison's sudden removal, it took years for the fans to accept Weinberg, although through hard work and Weinberg's ability to seamlessly meld with the band, he actually became a fan favorite. Despite this, when Slipknot was presented with the opportunity to replace Weinberg with Eloy, they did not hesitate. As a business, it's a no-brainer to ship out the older model for a new one. Once again, another key personality is removed and replaced with a soulless void of a member, a void that can obviously drum like a animal, but let's be honest, seeing a jacked motherfucker show off his bulging quads in a modified short jumpsuit whilst wearing this pathetic mask doesn't really scream Slipknot. It's obvious that Eloy was brought in for his abilities alone. It's clear it was simply a business decision. Modern day Slipknot sees their members as replaceable assets, with both Craig Jones and Chris Fenn being released from the band with little to no reasoning and no response when presented with backlash. It's even gotten to the point where most members are just employees, they're not even band members. Instead of explaining their reasoning for the removal of classic members, they simply hire a new employee, design a new mask, and hope that fans will just focus on the mysterious new member whose real identity will be leaked about 24 hours after the announcement. They can then slap that new member on a t-shirt, design a Funko Pop, and get to touring again. It's all about the show and presentation. It's no longer about the personality. This may seem like it's always been the case, but that just isn't true. The early masked interviews and promo packages present so much personality, which just can't be replicated by an unmasked Corey Taylor reviewing his favorite cheese products on a Loudwire interview, or Sean Crayon pretentiously retelling the same edgy story whilst quite literally being 55 years old. So what does this have to do with masks? Well, I'd argue that every problem I have mentioned during this section is only possible due to the masks. Let's take Metallica for example. If Hetfield or even fucking Lars were to leave the band, the product would become a shill of itself. Fans wouldn't even consider them Metallica anymore. Any replacement would receive massive scrutiny, and not one person will buy a Metallica Funko Pop. Due to Slipknot's usage of masks, this will never really be a problem. They are slowly but surely transitioning their band from traditional musicians playing music to a touring stage show akin to the Blue Man Group. I can almost guarantee you that Slipknot will not even end when all the original members leave or pass away. It will become a soulless brand entity hell-bent on feeding you masked slop metal music, alongside a healthy serving of only the most environmentally friendly vinyl figures. And that isn't even just some dumb conspiracy, they have literally hinted at it in interviews. If you reject the conspiracy that Slipknot were created and pushed as a more commercially viable mushroom head in the early days, their original usage for the masks resembled that of GWAR or The Residents, artistic expression that allowed them to put their heart and soul into the music and performance without any personal limitations holding them back. Despite the possibility of an optimistic start, it's clear that the masks masks have become a marketing tool, a shield that allows them to get away with unethical practices whilst utilizing the visual aspect of the masks and costumes to milk the brand dry in terms of merchandising and on-stage performances, all until Slipknot removes every original member and piece of personality that made me and many fans fall in love with them in the first place, and that would truly mark their full transition into a corporate stage act. But hey, guess what? This is simply just my opinion based on the information I've researched. There is always other perspectives to explore, and of course, who better than somebody who has literally met and worked alongside various Slipknot band members.
So do you believe the visual style nowadays more so focuses on the kind of marketing side of marketing the band?
I go back and forth on that. Sometimes I'll see something and I'm like, yeah, that's like a corporate decision or whatever. And it is what it is. Like when you're in the biggest metal band on the planet and it is a machine, there are going to be things like that happen. I mean, ultimately the goal there is to make money and to feed the mouths of the people in your camp. But then they do stuff that I'm still like, man, that is the coolest thing ever. Like they do still definitely do the core Slipknot stuff that I love. And we've seen a lot of that with the marketing for the 25th anniversary stuff. They have a website up right now that looks and acts just like the original website from 99, and I think that that's great. I think that's rad. So I definitely think that there are, obviously, just like anything that ends up successful, there are going to be corporate hands in the pot, but I also think that Sean is and always will do what Sean wants to do for Slipknot. So.
Yeah. What is your opinion on the development of their visual style? What do you think's improved? What do you think's gotten worse since kind of Mate Feed, Kill Repeat up until now, basically?
Well, to be honest, I'm not really a fan of big budget theatrics. I really like the old gritty kind of handmade stuff, which is ironic because I do a lot of stuff with Slipknot now. Like we're pretty much Sid's go-to guy on masks, and literally just last year we did an 18-karat gold gas mask for him. Wow. Like the 25th anniversary tribute. So as cool and as big and high-end as that is, I just don't think anything ever beats like raw grit. When it comes down to it, I'd rather see them setting their own drums on fire, almost an uncontrolled environment, than pyro and all the light shows and stuff. But it's just subjective. I mean, that's just my opinion. It's a little deeper than just like they're my favorite or whatever. I've gotten to do a lot because of that band. Like they played a huge part not only in my life but in my channel, which in turn gave me my adult life. And yeah, it just runs a little deeper than just like, oh, I think their masks are cool or whatever. So I'm forever grateful for just the discovery of masks and then the things that I chose to enjoy. I obviously kind of made a living like being a fan and with my fandoms and stuff, and there was no real good reason for Sid or for Jay or for whoever to reach out to me and kind of give me a chance to work with them and do the stuff that we've been able to do. So I think that kind of speaks volumes, at least about the individuals and how some of them still get it. And I think that that's super cool.
Despite all of the problems I've mentioned in regards to Slipknot, they still have a plethora of albums that I consider to be fantastic, as well as a rich history that started off incredibly positive and creative. I wish the same could be said for the modern day bands, but unfortunately we are only just going to get more dystopian as this video progresses. The two bands I want to focus on in this section are Sleep Token and President, with the latter being the most recent and far more substanceless variety of the two. It's always good to end on a negative note, so let's start with Sleep Token. Sleep Token are a band that debuted their first project in 2016 and were able to build a sizable following consisting mainly of core kids through their alternative usage of djent, metalcore and various other rhythmic styles such as drum and bass, jungle, and of course disgustingly auto-tuned R&B. This small alternative audience would transition into a Goliath TikTok e-girl fanbase during the build-up to the release of the 2023 album Take Me Back to Eden. Before we can explore the actual music of Sleep Token, we need to understand the real reason in which they were able to transition from a few 100,000 to quite literally millions of fans during this album's release cycle. Spoiler alert, it's almost entirely due to their visual image. Sleep Token just so happened to look pretty awesome. Their masks, costumes, stage presence, music videos, and even album arts during this period all connoted a specific vibe. A vibe that myself and a huge section of the alternative online fanbase happened to find extremely appealing. It was mysterious, dark, and didn't play on the tropes already built by the masked bands of the past. It was incredibly refreshing in a visual sense to see this kind of band explode onto the scene. I unfortunately then actually listened to the music, and upon my first experience of Take Me Back to Eden, it became very clear to me that a huge reason for their exponential growth is clearly their visual style and not the music they create. And don't get me wrong, you can like what you like. I just can't avoid the fact fact that Sleep Token are incredibly boring. They are a fascinating example of a band that are able to take every good idea they have and immediately ruin it by situating it in the worst possible place within a song. Heavy gent section with a sick melody, let's slap 2 minutes of auto-tuned slop ambience after it with zero nuance. Funky ass bass section, let's awkwardly slot it in between more ambience with zero build-up or payoff, and then jump scare you with another fucking gent section that ends 30 seconds before you even realise it sounds kinda cool. Despite all the problems with Take Me Back to Eden, I found elements of the songs extremely appealing and could understand, despite the fact it sounded like AI, why people in the metal scene would be able to find it enjoyable, which alongside their visual image made their size more understandable for me. I optimistically believed they had promise, a group of talented musicians with potential to grow into their sound and make something that lived up to their monumental visual personas. And then they released their latest album, which basically killed any hope I had left. Not even just for the band, just in general. This is me right now. Formulaic auto-tuned pop slop that is somehow followed by even more formulaic gent sections that of course aren't quite complete without chalkboard tier auto-tuned singing. This may sound like I'm being a generational hater, which I am, but it's hard for me to deny that I am genuinely rooting for Sleep Token as a band. They are quite clearly talented, and it's difficult to present the idea that they are a corporate slop band attempting to profit off of the visual image due to their years spent independent prior to their explosion into the mainstream. I feel as if they just need a producer to strip away some of their creative control and encourage structuring their songs in a way that removes the boring sludge and polished production that feels almost AI-like, and instead focus on cool, interesting music.
Do you think that Sleep Token would be as compelling and as big as they are if they just completely dropped the masks?
As cool as like theatrical music is, and as much as I love it, there is a pretty distinct difference between someone that likes theatrical music and masks and like a horror element, and weird book talk girls that just drool over some sort of like safe scary thing that they think makes them quirky. So I think without that weird like sexualization of Sleep Token from cringy girls that read about like reverse and stuff, they wouldn't be what they are. And I also don't think that they would be nearly as ruined as they are, because bands and stuff listen to that. Obviously they're going to make money from those people. They're going to try to appeal to those people, so they're going to go in that direction of like, well, let me cater to these cringe girls or whatever it is. So
Sleep Token are quite clearly the most popular masked band in the modern day if you ignore Slipknot, and although I believe they are genuine as artists, it's difficult to present the same amount of respect towards the band as the masked bands from the past. If you look at the Residents or TISM, they have incredible genre-defining style-bending music as a backdrop to their visual personas. Despite the incredible visual presentation, all Sleep Token has as a backdrop is formulaic pop music disguised as metal, and an album that feels dated despite only being released 2 years ago, and another album released this year that will likely feel dated in 2 months. I understand this is entirely subjective, but I do believe it's very difficult to argue that Sleep Token would have anywhere near the success they currently have without the usage of the masks. In an already crowded metal landscape, they just simply don't present anything interesting in terms of their music. This seems to present a shift in modern day culture, specifically related to the consumption of art. Don't get me wrong, the visual has always been incredibly important within music, even when exploring influential genre-defining individuals from the past like Hendrix or, God forbid, the Beatles. Their visual image had a lot to do with their success. Hendrix's hair, colourful outfits, and eccentric stage presence, and of course the Beatles' rotten teeth and women beating fists. Despite these bands existing during a time where labels would cherry pick which artists were allowed to be in the music industry, I'd argue that there is no period in time where the visual image of a band has mattered more than in the modern day. Sleep Token are a clear example of this, a band that quite clearly would not have received the success they have without the masks. We can also look towards social media when exploring this topic. I hate to mention it again, but the TikTok explosion of new metal a few years ago presents this perfectly. One of the key reasons younger generations are so obsessed with alternative culture in the modern day is the resurgence of various genres from the past, many of which happen to be way more visually appealing than a guitarist with a black haircut and a black t-shirt and black skinny jeans. It doesn't matter which music utilizes more harmonics or sweep picks, it's the personality of the visual first due to how music is marketed within the modern day. And don't get me wrong, I do think nu metal is more musically interesting than overly technical metal, but their appeal has a lot to do with the visual and how the music combines with that visual aesthetic. It's all about the visual, it's all about social media. It's why bands that are beloved by thirst trap and e-girls become so insanely popular. Motherfuckers just straight up be looking at that shit. I personally do not, but I know some of you motherfuckers in the audience do be looking at those thirst traps, and then you look at the music because of this dusty ass. Okay.
Do you believe that the kind of art form in terms of the way it's utilized in music is watered down in any way, or do you feel like it's kind of just an evolution?
Yeah, I feel like it's a super saturated market at this point. It used to be, oh, look at this band, they wear masks, they have a gimmick, they're one of like 6 bands that are using masks. And now it's like, it is still a gimmick, but it's a gimmick that everybody can see through at this point. Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
And that sucks because I love theatrical music. So I think back in the day too, to get away with it, you had to be legit at what you were doing. Like, you had to be good to get past the whole like bullying phase of being a band that wears masks. You kind of had to prove yourself to like back up the fact that like, yeah, I can get up here in a Halloween costume and be fine with it.
Although I am a firm believer that audio makes up around 70% of the appeal of anything within the visual medium, social media skews this slightly in my eyes. You scroll and scroll until you see something that jumps out. And in the case of our next and most egregious band, it's a retard in a latex president mask jumping around in epileptic flashing lighting.
My thoughts on President are that I'm disappointed in myself for even falling for the hype, because the wallpaper of music, the cardboard box of music, I just felt like, what a miss. They had such a cool concept, and I even thought that the look was cool in the teasers and stuff, and then we got that first single and I was like, oh.
Yeah, I agree.
If you're somewhat aware of what's going on in heavy music at the moment, it's likely you've been unable to avoid the band President. The masked band exploded onto the scene about a month ago and immediately gained millions of views through the overly flashy high production value music video for In the Name of the Father. This was then combined with prominent online discussion regarding who the masked lead singer could potentially be, with the answer to this question being pretty much confirmed not long after. But before we get to that, let's quickly explore the music. Yeah, remember when I said that Sleep Token have redeemable qualities? President do not. Each to their own, but in my opinion, this is one of the most creatively void, overproduced, uninteresting slop metal bands I've heard in a while. The lead singer needs to be permanently banned from using any autotune plugin for at least 12 years after releasing this piece of shit. Regardless of whether you agree with me in regards to the band's actual sound, it's hard to disagree on how void and vapid the lyricism within President songs are. When being presented with a band called President who dress in politician masks and do politician speeches on stage, you'd expect some sort of political commentary within the music. Yeah, no, it's just edgy, vapid bollocks with zero interesting subject matter. I was pretty flabbergasted when this music video came out, not just due to the music and awful image, but how much positive attention it received online, although it all began to make sense when I found out who the lead singer was theorized to be. Turns out it's highly likely to be Charlie Simpson, who rose to prominence within the music industry through the label-backed pop act Busted, and transitioned into the post-hardcore band Fightstar during the height of that genre's popularity. I don't want to spread misinformation here, so I'm just going to give you the facts and rumors and let you make up your own mind on what might be going on with Presidents behind the scenes. A band that highly resembles the intensely popular Sleep Token in both sound and gimmick suddenly burst onto the scene with an overly expensive looking music video featuring a sound that is so incredibly overproduced and inoffensive it's actually impressive. This receives millions of views across all services despite being their first ever release. It is then rumored that the masked lead singer is a music industry mainstay that has a track record of forming bands within genres that are incredibly popular at the time. The band then plays one of the most prominent metal festivals within England despite having only 2 songs, and based on logistics and time frame were likely booked to the festival long before the release of any of these songs. Already seems a little bit fishy. However, the more you dig, the more the puzzle pieces begin to slot together. So on their management contact details on their socials is labeled as Future History Management, which just so happens to also represent Sleep Token. Future History Management is conveniently owned by Andy Coppin, the founder and booker for Download Festival, which explains not only President's inclusion on the lineup despite only having 2 songs, but Sleep Token's baffling headlining spot at the festival, which of course received much backlash, and according to people I know that were were there, had by far the smallest crowd out of any headliner despite 0 clashes. Although it's not fully confirmed that Charlie Simpson is the lead singer, it is highly likely as his media company Komorbi Entertainment Limited owns the rights to everything related to the President project. I would like to quickly mention that it is theorized by fans that President is a Sleep Token side project, but I find that very unlikely. So based on all this information, I wonder what could be at play here. I'm sure it's entirely organic and natural and has nothing to do with knowing all the right people in all the right places. President represent a potential trend in metal that is only going to water down the genre in my eyes. Once again, their popularity and relevance relies almost entirely on the visual image and mystery surrounding the members involved. In a similar manner to Sleep Token, only much worse due to the fact that they are quite literally banking off of the popularity of Sleep Token. Do not get me wrong, masked bands can exist in the modern day without needing to accredit their existence and success to other bands, for example Batushka or even Ghost, but President sounds almost identical to Sleep Token, only much worse. And in my uneducated opinion, this was entirely purposeful to try and create another cash cow similar to Sleep Token, only more corporate somehow. This is all alleged and obviously form your own opinion, but President is one of the most obvious and insulting examples of alleged industry planted music I've seen in recent years, clearly banking off of the success of another artist that actually did grind for years before their mainstream emergence, to attempt to make a profit off of the allure and appeal of masks and anonymity within music. I know this may all seem very nihilistic and I'm clearly continuing to anger as this video progresses, but President signifies to me the worst and most egregious way to utilize masks within music. Gone are the days of the Residents where costumes and masks allowed art to progress and encouraged performers to represent the music effectively on stage. Masks are now just used as marketing slop, so another jaded, out-of-touch pop star can live his dream of being a masked metalhead whilst shamelessly copying another contemporary band so they can become a cash cow for individuals in the music industry that have their hands in so many goddamn pockets they can quite literally control the musical landscape. They can manufacture whatever they want, whenever they want, and for some reason, beknownst to me, the piggies will still eat up the fucking slop.
What do you see for the future of masks within heavy music? Do you think it's gonna decline in popularity? Do you think it's only on the way up?
I think it could go either way, but what I really hope is that we bring the scary part back with it. Like, I feel like, again, not to keep bringing Slipknot up, but when you went to a Slipknot show in 99 or 2000, there was a level of like anxiety and fear and like, oh, I could get my ass beat here, or like something's gonna get set on fire, or so, you know what I mean? Like, it was just very like, it was heavy and all around, not just the music, not just the looks, not just the atmosphere, everything was heavy. And I wanna see heavy, aggressive, violent, crazy shows to accompany these cool looks that we're getting.
So less fetish masks, more
yeah,
scary.
no more pussy book talk cringe girl shit. I want people to get their ass beat.